Almost 3 million young people belong to the Boy Scouts, and collectively they spend millions of hours a year outdoors. On most excursions, the greatest hazards Scouts face are mosquito bites or a campfire ghost story scare. But on several high-profile occasions, now going back to the 1990s, things have gone terribly wrong. And the question then becomes who, if anyone, is at fault? Here's John Donvan for our series, Nightline Investigates.
Their famous motto is be prepared, but first on the list of virtues that Scouts memorize is the word trustworthy.
To keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight.
Including a 17-year-old boy named Michael Sclawy-adelman, who first went into scouting when he was 8 years old.
So he really had a goal.
Yeah, certainly.
He wanted to be an eagle.
Which is a hard thing to do.
But because of what happened to Michael on his way to Eagle, Scouting's highest rank, achieved by only a very few.
How close to Eagle Scout was he?
Pretty close.
Because he never made it, and because of what went wrong, his parents are now challenging that which the Scouts earned through decades of providing great experiences and life lessons for hundreds of millions of boys, some of whom, famous now, still call Scouting one of the best parts of their lives. They are challenging the very trustworthiness of Scouting itself, which they took as a given.
I mean, it just boiled down to, us trusting in the Boy Scouts.
So you always trusted the Boy Scouts?
Oh, sure.
A trust, they now say, was fatally misplaced.
What do you remember from that?
I dropped him off. And that's the last I saw.
Michael's last hike was scheduled as a 20-miler through the Big Cypress National Preserve, which borders the Florida Everglades. The temperature that day hit a high of 92 degrees. Michael was, his parents say, in fit physical condition and determined to do that hike.
I spoke to him on the phone while they were on their way to the church to be dropped off. And the last thing he said to me was, "I love you."
The hikers set off at approximately 9 o'clock that morning. 3 boys, led by Scoutmasters Howard Crompton and Andrew Schmidt, who noticed that the heat was getting to the boys at about 1 o'clock when the hike was half completed. They weren't eating much because they were extremely hot, Crompton is quoted as telling police. In his own handwriting, he described the ordeal that began at mile 15. Mike began to seem dizzy. We had him sit down to rest and drink water. After about 20 minutes, Mike got worse. He seemed to be choking. I turned him on his side. He vomited. I cleared his mouth. He stopped breathing. An hour and a half after stopping the hike, he placed a call on his cell phone.
911, what is the address of your emergency?
The Florida Trail. We're hiking in the Everglades. The guy's not breathing.
The guy's not breathing?
Yes, sir.
Crompton had been performing CPR on Michael for 45 minutes by the time a rescue helicopter reached them. The report says that by then, Michael had no pulse. He was airlifted out, but half an hour later, he was declared dead.
Their son dying during a hike on a hot day in the Everglades.
Now a mother and father are gearing
This is how the community learned about Michael's death, but his parents' account of how they learned is the stuff of nightmares.
The sheriff knocked on the door, and then he said, "Michael," and he died. When my husband came home, and he told them, their screams just still ring in my ears because they were screaming and collapsing to the ground. We never heard from Scouts
That night you never heard from them?
No,
the
nobody
next day?
ever. One of them, Howard Crompton, called about midday.
Having to place that call was no doubt another kind of nightmare, as Crompton and Schmidt to this day lead that scout troop and had been trusted for years by scores of parents. Only now, they are being sued by Michael's parents.
They're supposed to be trained to recognize, signs and symptoms. At some point, he told them that he didn't feel well, and they finally stopped. From the time they stopped until they recorded the 911 call, it was an hour and a half.
You were counting on their expertise.
Right.
You
Definitely.
entrusted their expertise.
Right, not to press on regardless for another 5 miles if you're showing signs of heat and disorientation.
The suit that names the Scoutmasters, who declined to be interviewed, and the local church that sponsors Michael's troop, and the Boy Scouts of America, was filed for Michael's parents by attorney Mark Sylvester, who brought this case to our attention.
This is not a condemnation of the Boy Scouts. They are a very worthwhile organization. They instill good morals and values in our children, but at the same time, they have flaws. Children are dying. Children are being severely injured. This was not the first death on a hike.
I can't imagine what it must be like for parents to lose their son. But what I can tell you is the Boy Scouts is so proactive in everything they do with regards to safety. There's risks in everything we do in life.
Kathy Burns, an assistant scoutmaster in Ohio, is one of a trio of leaders the organization assembled when we asked for an interview. The Scouts insisted that it be 3 people and set 30 minutes as a limit.
I am a mom. I have 2 sons that have gone through the program. They're both Eagle Scouts.
Can you tell me with complete certainty and security that I can put my kids into a scouting program and something like this isn't going to happen?
Absolutely. This is a safe program.
Michael's case, they said reasonably, they could not discuss, as it's now in litigation. But the Adelman's attorney argues that the Scouts have been negligent before. The family's attorney points out more than half a dozen cases of Scouts dying during activities going back to the 1990s, struck by lightning in areas where thunderstorms had been forecast, or drowning while canoeing in waters that had been described as dangerous, or dying of heat stroke while hiking in terrain considered among the most difficult parts of the Grand Canyon, only for experienced hikers. But it was frustrating for both ends of this conversation when I brought these cases up. Richard Borland, the Scouts' National Health and Safety Chief, is relatively new to the position and unfamiliar with many of the facts.
You know, I wasn't here when that occurred.
As were his colleagues.
I can't speak to the decision-making process. I wasn't involved at that level.
And there was a tendency, as we discussed the 2005 Scout Jamboree, where hundreds of Scouts suffered heat exhaustion after waiting hours in sunlight to hear a speech by a delayed President Bush, a tendency to emphasize the rescue after the fact, the reaction to the calamity.
We had an awesome medical team, response team. We had physicians and nurses and EMTs, and we did an excellent job taking care of the Scouts who were presenting with a headache or some minor symptom.
You also had a great response mechanism in place, which could, in theory, have triggered those numbers because we had the right professionals there to make sure those kids that went down with some kind of heat symptoms were well.
So that happened, all of those kids go down. After the Jamboree is over, what happens inside the organization?
I don't know really how to answer that specific question.
Well,
because
did you have a meeting about it?
I wasn't here, but I will tell you that what happened as a result of those after-action reports were conducted. We went through those. We looked for lessons learned, if you will. We studied what happened. We formulated plans. Safety is integral into all of our programs.
Which is the very reason that these incidents stand out.
Yes, there is.
Scouts put in collectively millions of hours per year in the wilderness, no one getting seriously hurt, not surprising because of the near constant stress on safety, so that when someone does get hurt, it seems to require explanation. And if it's your kid who got hurt, the explanation that this mother of Scouts finally offered may or may not satisfy.
I think we're saying that there's risks involved in everything you do in life, and in Boy Scouts, we take a proactive approach. Everything we do is looking at what could happen, what are the risks involved, how do we prepare for that?
But I'm asking a different question. Are you saying that what that's really down to is that sometimes things just happen?
There are circumstances that are beyond our control, but that's where our training kicks in. And that's where we use those skills that we've learned to kick in
so are you saying the Scout organization has never been at fault? No Scoutmaster has ever made a mistake in terms of preparation ahead of time? None of these things are ever the result of a Scoutmaster who didn't get it right or a policy that wasn't fully developed?
That responsibility is a joint responsibility. Boy Scouts works jointly with the parents who are sending their Scouts on these outings and know their Scouts the best, with the Scouts who have a responsibility to learn the skills and to prepare themselves physically, the leaders who are trained and who train the Scouts, and the community organizations that work with us. So we all share responsibility to make things as safe as possible.
Which is what Michael's parents thought he would be that day, as safe as possible and home by sundown. Their goodbye that morning never meant to be final, but it was. I'm John Donvan for Nightline.